When I was 20, I fell for a boy.
This is a story about a ghost people who live in a ghost territory.
As a daughter of South Korean immigrants, I grew up being told stories about our homeland.
Expired from the campaign that I am on death row for crimes I did not commit.
If you step out that door, Tala, then you are choosing yourself over your family.
되게 아들이 했답니까?
근데 왜 자꾸 우리 애한테 물으시는 건데요, 그러면?
Hi everyone, my name is Samir Balu. I'm the Industry and Education Programmer at the Toronto Relation International Film Festival. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be starting off our first panel of the Real Ideas Conference themed Specificity Drives Authenticity with the Producers Table Talk. I'd love for us all to take a moment to reflect on the land in which we're fortunate to live, work, and grow. Although I've been living in Toronto ever since moving here at the age of 10, I recognize there is still so much room for me to intentionally learn, listen, and honor the original stewards and caretakers of this land that I was so privileged to move to and now get to live on and work with all of you. Real Asians offices and main activities are located on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat nations. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty of collective responsibility that we're all invited into for the protection and sharing of land, water, and resources. For today's panel, we would like to remind everyone that if you're watching live, you can leave us questions just through the chat. If you're viewing from a phone, you can also just include your questions from the chat. We have Denise as our captioner. And we just want to say thank you to our lead sponsors of Real Ideas, which are Crave, and our special sponsors, DGC National, Warner Brothers, Canada Media Fund, NABET, Unifor 700M, and our funder, Ontario Creates. Lastly, we would love to hear feedback from all of you. Please visit realasian.com/RI survey and let us know what you liked and what you would like to see from our industry panels next year. We'll have the QR code posted at the end. I'll now hand over the rest of the time to the amazing Shreya, who will be introducing the rest of the panelists today. Shreya is an actress, filmmaker, and producer who is currently working on an amazing comedy series called Layla is Relevant, as well as writing a film about trafficking. Welcome, Shreya.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. And let me introduce the amazing and talented panelists that we have here, Priscilla, Rua, and Shant. Priscilla Galvez is a producer and director based in Toronto. She began her career as an associate producer at Blue Ice Pictures before she co-founded the production company Silent Towers in 2018, where she's produced work for CBC, PBS, POV, The New Yorker, and Hulu. Priscilla's film has premiered at many film festivals, including TIFF, Tribeca, Hot Dogs, to name a few. Most recently, she co-produced the Canadian Screen Award-winning documentary short Sing Me a Lullaby and a feature film Islands, which was awarded a special jury prize for Best Breakthrough Performance at the South by Southwest. As director, Priscilla has made over 20 mini docs for CBC Arts and directed and co-created documentary series Art, Death, and Taxes on CBC Gem. She's currently in post-production on her short film, A Fermenting Woman. Rua Wani is a co-founder of Adani Pictures, a film, TV, and digital production company based in Toronto. Previously, she was a TV development executive at Boat Rocker Media, where she worked on celebrated Canadian scripts, dramas, and comedies. Rua is currently participating in the NSI's On-Demand Access Program, a producers lab focused on Canadian-European co-production, BIPOC Producers Lab, Real World Producers Program, and a Feminist Business Accelerator Program, Fifth Wave Labs, hosted by CFC and BAM Spark. Rua is also a film festival juror speaker, and a part-time film and TV professor at Sheridan College and George Brown College. And last but not least, we have Shant Joshi, who is an award-winning producer and a president of Faith Pictures based in Los Angeles and Toronto, on a mission to decolonize Hollywood by creating cinematic content for, by, and about queer, trans, and BIPOC people. On his mission, his projects has won awards at Sundance, Berlin, Inside Out, and Bend, and premiered at film festivals like Toronto, Hot Docs, and Black Star, to name a few. Shant is currently vice chair of the BIPOC TV and Film Board, sits on the Canadian Media Producers Association's EDI Action Committee, and sits on the advisory board of the Future of Film Showcase. He's an alum of Canadian Film Centre, Rotterdam Lab, Osgoode Hall Law School, and named a real-world trailblazer under York University's top 30 changemakers under 30. It is so lovely to be around such an accomplished group, and I cannot wait to get started. So I'm going to ask this question to all of you, starting with Priscilla and then Rua and Shant. How did you get started? What was your what was your journey like, and why did you choose to become a producer? Priscilla?
Oh, I get to be the first. First of all, thank you, Real Asian. Thank you, Shreya. Reading bios is a hard job, so really appreciate that. Yeah, so, okay, how did I get started? I always knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I didn't go to film school. I think a lot of people can relate, but my parents were immigrants, and being like the daughter of immigrants, I just felt like too much pressure to like have to go to school for film, because I knew it was like, pretty risky and expensive. And so I chose not to do that, but always had it in my mind. And so I decided, when I had saved up enough money after getting my bachelor's at Laurier, I decided to do just like a year at Sheridan, which I heard Rua is a teacher at, so which is great. So I did a 1-year program there, and got hooked. And so I decided to make the move, and I actually wanted to be an editor initially, and it didn't work out. But I had like the organizational skills I felt to be a producer, and so that's what that's how I kind of started in the film industry. It was like applying to be a producer's assistant, which is where I got an internship at Blue Ice Pictures, and that was sort of my start. And actually my education in producing, I didn't really learn too much about producing in school, because I was there as a director, actually, to be a director. But I learned a lot just from listening to my boss's conversations in an open office, and reading contracts and legal documents and being on set. And so I have a lot to thank to the producers at Blue Ice, and one of my mentors, Marianne Waterhouse, who is an amazing producer, line producer. And yeah, that's sort of how I got started, I guess, in producing.
I feel like that's like a lot of people's journey as well. I'm curious about Rua and Shant, but like I totally understand. It's like you learned like on the job, it feels like, mostly.
Totally.
Rua, what about you?
What about me? Thank you so much, first of all, Shreya, for the intro, and of course to Real Asian. I have a similar background to Priscilla, so it really resonates with what you said. But for me, it wasn't even that I was a child of immigrants. I am an immigrant. I was an immigrant myself. So I moved. I'm Kashmiri. I grew up in the Middle East, and I immigrated here with my family when I was 14. So, for me, it wasn't even a thing of like, oh, I'd like to pursue film and TV, but I don't think I can. It's like, it didn't even enter my consciousness. It's not even like a thing to consider, right? But, I was I've always been very creative. I grew up being like a voracious reader and writer. But it never even crossed my mind to pursue sort of a creative path. I did the good immigrant, South Asian girl thing, and I went to business school, a very practical profession. And it blows my mind to think about it now, but I originally applied and got in to study, to do a joint honors in economics and finance. That lasted, just a short while. And then I stayed in business school. I just kind of transitioned to the most creative thing I could do within business school, which was marketing. And I ended up minoring in psychology. And then I moved back to Toronto and I was working in, marketing for a while. And then finally I was just like, okay, that's it. I gotta, I understood very early that I was not going to be happy and therefore not going to do as well as I could in this line of work. And so I had always thought of myself as like working in media. And, even then it was not film or TV. It just wasn't a possibility. It wasn't even in my consciousness. But I had thought maybe I'll be like a journalist or work for some kind of digital magazine or something like that. And so I ended up leaving my job and I went to Ryerson, now of course Toronto Metropolitan University. And I went to RTA and I did a master's in media production. And honestly, it was just when I was in that program that the world of film and TV opened up to me. Most of my professors at that time were from the industry, and it suddenly became something that was like real and tangible and not some like faraway dreamland that I had kind of conceived of it as. And so I just kind of really embraced that from then on. And I kind of just took on every opportunity I could to learn more about it and to figure out what this is all about. I worked with some peers at the time, in my program, just on making like a small like student sort of web series. I dabbled in theater. I associate produced a play at the Hamilton Fringe Festival. And then I think my first sort of film TV job out of that was I interned with, controversial to say now, but with the Weinstein Company. This was pre-Me Too, pre-everything to do with Harvey Weinstein. This is back in 2015. But they set up a sales office at TIFF that year, and I interned with them. And that was, I learned a lot while I was there. And then I ended up getting a gig at Boat Rocker, where I, got to work on both the development and production side of things and primetime scripted drama and comedy. And then that's just how it went. So, very, very different from what I had ever thought of or imagined for myself. But I think this is what it was meant to be.
It feels like, what you were saying, it was like, I could relate to it, by the way, because I also went to business school and did
yeah.
I've been in a similar boat, but I dropped out. But it just feels like knowledge is power especially for where you're at, because like you went to like business school and then you kind of like transfer those skills over to like producing now, right? And I feel like that knowledge that might not, like you were like, oh, maybe that didn't work out, but it kind of did, which is so lovely to see how it's like transferred over now, right? And Shant, what about you? How did you get started in producing? Were you always the one who was like, I'm going to produce my own films, or do you have a very similar story like Priscilla and Rua?
It's a bit different, but with a similar background in the sense that, it wasn't an easy conversation to talk to my parents and say, I want to go to film school. But from a very early age, I was glued to the screen. Like I was watching anything between Disney, like Lion King movies, and like Bollywood, like Shah Rukh Khan movies. Like that was like my media diet. And I wanted to be an I wanted to be in the world of storytelling ultimately. So I wanted to be an actor, realized I wasn't good at that. Then I wanted to be a director, realized I wasn't good at that. And then just around when I was like 12 or 13 years old, my dad sat me down and he was like, if you want to like be like a storyteller, a filmmaker, whatever, like you have to like set yourself to that. You can't just like, it can't be a hobby. It has to be like a career. And so like, he like indoctrinates this idea that my high school career is going to sort of, ideally build towards my larger career. And so that's sort of what ended up happening was I went to film school at York University, and about halfway through my first year, I realized there were other talented filmmakers that were out there that were great at like, imagining the composition of shots and performances and scripts and all this kind of stuff. And what I was good at was identifying great talent, reading scripts, putting together a budget, was good at math, scheduling, like bringing people together. So like halfway through my first year at film school, I realized I really loved producing. And so over the course of 3 years at film school, I was producing a bunch of short films for other students. And then my professor, Ingrid Veninger, invited me to production manage her feature film Porcupine Lake. And that was a great opportunity. That was a telefilm, the Harold Greenberg films we like financed with tax credit. So it's like the whole, like feature film structure of a, traditional like Canadian soft money financed film. And so I got a chance to see that at work. I got a chance to see it both go into production and then through post, festivals, submissions, rejections, all that stuff. The film ended up premiering at TIFF, which was fantastic, and getting a chance to see the sales side of things. And it was around that time as well that I had also decided to move out to Los Angeles. So my parents at a young age, when I was like 2 years old, applied for reunification with my grandmother in New Jersey. So I got my green card when I was about like 17 years old. So I was able to move out to LA and, just sort of to pave my pathway. So I went into, as soon as I arrived, the first thing I did was I went to the Produce By conference, which is run by the PGA. And I was sitting on this panel about indie, because I'm really, focused towards independent film financing. And it was like a panel with like roadside attractions, distribution and production, but also like there was an agent from WME and there was an agent from UTA. And I was like, why are there like talent agents up on a stage talking about independent film finance? And I realized that outside of Canada, the agents are huge, gatekeepers and, sort of like influencers with regards to how independent films get financed because they are the channelers of, information basically. So I interned at UTA, at TIFF. I worked at Madhouse Entertainment, Adam Kohlbrenner's company, and I worked at Buchwald at a talent agency in the lit side. I got a chance to see Project Lit Packaged. I got a chance also to see projects, a lot of mediocre projects, propel up, and a lot of like deserving projects not necessarily get the spotlight that I thought they deserved. One of the scripts I read when I was at Buchwald, one of the first scripts I read was His House, Remy Weeks' film. They were just casting it, so I was just reading it to do coverage on what actors we could submit. And then I went to my bosses and I was like, this is a great script, like this guy's not repped in the States, we should rep him. And they were like, oh, who are you, what's going on? So anyways, he goes on to premiere His House at Sundance, sell it to Netflix, build a huge career. And, it's one of those things where it just sort of, I realized that the Hollywood system was not built to necessarily, raise up deserving projects, especially from underrepresented creators. And so that's sort of what spurred the idea behind Decolonize Hollywood with Fake Pictures. So yeah, and then I basically quit my job at the agency world and then decided to produce full time. Was unemployed for a little while and then was able to bring in enough money into the company to make a living. So
wow, Shant, that is a journey. That is like since the time when your parents like kind of supported you and till now, it's just like sounds like such a solid journey that you've had, and it's just wonderful to hear. Thank you for sharing. Priscilla, I have a question for you. So obviously, like you make documentaries and, film in itself is really hard. Documentaries is even harder. So I kind of wanted to ask you, like, what was your first, like producing your first documentary like, and what role, like, how did you get that role? And what was the release look like?
Yeah, so I think documentaries are challenging. I think both like between narrative and documentaries, they have their like it balances out eventually, just because I think both formats have their own challenges and benefits and like things that are easier and harder. With documentary, yeah, so I've produced and directed a bunch of short documentaries and short profile docs, mainly through the CBC actually. And I had this great relationship with CBC Arts. I started out doing like really short profile videos on artists, and that just sort of began building, and with the support of actually Romeo Candido, who is celebrated at the festival this year. He was at the CBC at that time, and that sort of like spurred my entry point into producing and directing documentaries. And then, yeah, I mean, yeah, anyways, I guess it's challenging because there's never enough money, especially for documentaries. And I think like directors and producers, they need to be they have to have a lot of skills, and they kind of have to do a lot of things at the same time. Like you end up being the sound recordist, you end up being the DP. I ended up co-producing a short documentary with Tiffany Shang called "Sing Me a Lullaby," and that project I began that collaboration well after she had shot the film and produced it already. And so I sort of like did not really get to experience like the main sort of like hard work involved in that, but there was a lot of hard work that ended up going into it in post-production. And so yeah, I think documentaries are just challenging in that it's like a longer, I think in the development stages, maybe for TV and film, it takes a bit more, there's a lot more time and in the development process. But with documentaries, I think it's just the length of just like production and filming it, and especially post-production. And, kudos to documentary film editors, where a lot of the storytelling is like really shaped from, from that process. And yeah, I've kind of forgotten what the question is, but but ultimately documentaries are really hard to make and produce.
I totally understand. I also come from a documentary background. That's why I wanted to ask your journey, because it comes with a lot of like patience and persistence and like long wait time and a lot of passion. So
Definitely.
yeah, so that's why like, it's just, yeah, that's what the question was about, like how you the first step. But thank you for sharing that. And Rua, you have gone to like many incubators throughout the years. How has those things, like those incubators, like shaped you?
Yeah, this year was very, very busy. I joined a few. So there was there's one with the NSI called the On Demand Access Program that they do with, I guess, their counterpart in Europe called IAVE. And I did the Real World Producer Program, and I've done, I guess, 2 business accelerator programs. So one called Fifth Wave Labs, that's hosted by the CFC, and another called Banff Spark. And, it was like, we're just coming out of COVID, and it was just, I felt like I had felt quite isolated, as I'm sure most of us did. And it just felt like a really good way to reconnect with folks in the industry, and also just kind of meet new people, make new connections. The NSI one in particular was an incredible experience. We actually just wrapped last week. We had our final workshop, and through that, our faculty and mentors at the lab were producers and sales agents and financiers from Europe, and it was very focused on Canada-Europe co-production. And it was just an incredible sort of philosophy throughout, which maybe we don't always get to hear too much here amongst ourselves, is of working together and collaborating with one another as producers. And I think it was just a really valuable time. I met some amazing people, a lot of people who, we kind of have done different things within the industry. So I know, there are a lot of things that like I haven't done that are not within my skill set, and vice versa. And it's just an amazing thing to be able to meet people who can fill in your gaps and the other way around. And I find that really valuable. And that's how I try to work, is really just kind of find people who know things that I don't. And, just kind of collaborate and get the best that you can out of it. So that has been really valuable. In addition, I would say through the NSI one, through Real World and the other ones, it's just been fantastic getting to meet, like through the labs, we've had people come in from the broadcasters to speak with us. And just to be able to kind of continue and grow that relationship is really valuable. We at Adani Pictures are developing a scripted TV series. So of course, it's really important for us to kind of, keep up to date with what the broadcasters are doing, what their programming strategy is, what they're greenlighting, what they're not greenlighting, and why. So it's just been a really good access point through the labs, just to kind of keep up those relationships. And then I guess through Fifth Wave Labs and Banff Spark, those have really been focused on building out and growing the company as a whole, and not just sort of training or mentoring as producers, but really about building out the company. And that's just been fantastic because, Shreya, you were a part of Fifth Wave Labs, you know this. The kind of one-on-one consultations that they give you access to with people who are, experts in marketing or in financing or branding, whatever it is, I found so valuable. And also I felt like with Fifth Wave Labs especially, it is so founded upon just kind of building out a company with a really strong DNA of just strong values about like what exactly is your company and brand founded upon. What kind of workplace do you want to create? What kind of values do you want to lead with? And that is of, that's of prime importance to us. I think there's a lot of we all talk a lot about the kind of world we want to live in and the kind of companies we want to work for, the companies we want to build. And it was just a really great opportunity to really kind of execute on that, and figure out how to not just say that, but do it. And of course, not to say, it's all works in progress. But yeah, I think it's just been a really amazing year of really fruitful and valuable connections, and a community. The biggest thing is just to what a wonderful thing to not be feeling like you're doing it all alone, and that there are just people who are there and who support you and who get you, and and vice versa. So yeah, it's just been a very busy but a very valuable year.
Especially after COVID, like what you were saying, because the last 2 years you've just been hustling by yourself, and suddenly you just find this community of people that just gets you. Yeah. And helps you build a team and supports you and supports your vision, which is so important. So Absolutely. That is very valuable information I'm sure you've gotten throughout. And that comes to Shant, just going off of that, how did you end up building your team and your network when you started Fate Pictures?
Yeah, so my first hire was Abdul Malik, who's this amazing screenwriter. It was spurred off of just foreseeing that as we were growing our slate, that I love reading scripts. I love sitting down and reading a good script, but I was starting to get a lot of incoming and wasn't able to just sort of sift through it and find really great projects. And while definitely can bring on an intern or an assistant to do coverage, I wanted someone who really understood story and structure to really helm that. And so Abdul was a fantastic hire. I hired him just as I was finishing the CFC, and So he became my director of development. I met him. We went to film school together at York University. He was 2 years ahead of me. And he wrote a film called Peace by Chocolate, which went on to premiere at Tribeca and made a bunch of money in the box office in the middle of a pandemic, which is wild. Like $200,000 in Canada. Like I don't even know how you can do that, but that was it's a great story, a really strong story about a Syrian refugee family that builds a Syrian refugee family that builds a chocolate factory in Nova Scotia. And he went on to write our new movie Queen Tut, and he's been creating a bunch of stuff and selling a whole bunch of stuff outside of the company as well. And then Lindsay, I met at the CFC. She just has a great eye for production, building relationships with crew. I realized, as I was building Faye, that I like being on set, but I'm not the person to be, there every day, reading the call sheets, making sure we're moving along, all that kind of stuff. I really wanted to hire someone to do that so that I could focus on building the company, focusing on financing our productions, building our capacity, sort of the overall management of our slate, and then slowly and surely using tools like the CMPA mentorship program. I've been mentoring a number of folks, as well as we've been bringing a lot of interns out of many film schools like York University, Sheridan, Humber, who have come on and gone on to go work at other companies and build great careers. So that's sort of how we've been building up, but we have a great core team, at least, which is the three of us, Abdul, Lindsay, and myself.
That's beautiful, because it's so important to build a solid team that has the same vision as you, as we mentioned. Okay, we're about to take a 5-minute break, everybody. We'll be back in 5 minutes, about 5:07.
Great.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. All right, so we're going to start a little bit of the questions that audience are asking. So one of the questions is, I think many of us have very similar conversation with our parents. I think that was about everyone. How do we connect and get attention and support for our projects from producers like yourselves? So I think that's questions for everybody. So I think we'll start with Priscilla.
Sorry, sure, yes. So, okay, how do we connect? Yeah, I think this is always a really tough question for me to answer, mainly because I'm an independent producer. I have a small company. We don't have a lot of people to, we don't have a lot of people to like read scripts and like look at projects, like sort of what Shant was saying, you need to really have a person like dedicated to doing that, and it does take a lot of time and a commitment to that. And so I think it's always just like a challenge amidst like all of the, just like as a filmmaker myself and like pitching projects to other producers, and like it always seems like it's like, how do I get your attention? That's always a question. I think it's really important that, as filmmakers, you are building a package and something that can get producers' attention, and a lot, and there are like different aspects that you can add to it, and it doesn't have to be like named cast necessarily, but just like something, just like sort of just that like something that sparks interest, that makes it unique and different. For me specifically, like I'm always looking for something different. I'm a bit of a weirdo. I like things that are weird, and I think film is like a very subjective art form, and it's a very subjective experience. And I think like I always tell filmmakers, like, don't feel down when you don't get someone's attention, because I think it's about the right producer, it's about the right collaborator ultimately, and it is just important to get yourself out there and again build that package and think about, what is that extra something that is going to elevate this project, whether it's whether it's the script, whether it's like some sort of like sponsor or some executive producer, or is it cast? Is it like a backstory as a director and a writer, like how you connect to the film and the script? What is that thing that's really going to spark the investment from a collaborator and a producer? And I think it's just like asking yourself those questions, and also just thinking about who is the right collaborator, because ultimately maybe it's not your project's fault. It's like, it is just like finding the right person for the project.
That is actually a really good advice, because not every producer is the right producer for your project. So I think like looking at what the production company has produced prior and it's similar to your content would be helpful. But what would you say, Rua? You're on mute. Zoom issues.
Thank you. So the question is, how do people connect with us?
Yes.
Okay, well, the simple answer, I guess, is go on our website. It's adanipictures.com, and you can contact us from there. But the bigger answer is that for us, it's actually just before this started, we were all chatting, and we just kind of briefly were talking about how long the development cycle is for TV. And I mean, even of course for feature films, you're working on a project for a long, long time. So I think for us, what's really important is just first and foremost setting a really strong foundation for hopefully a long and productive relationship with each other. So for me, it's like, at the first instance, it might not be that we kind of immediately find a project to work on together as soon as we meet, but first and foremost, I think I mean, I go on coffees and Zoom chats all the time with writers. You know, I'm always looking to just get to know people. I just want to get to know your voice, like who you are, where your passions lie, what your interests are, what you like watching. You know, what is that show you wish you could have made? Like whatever it is, like to me, I think that's just really, really important. There should be a match just in terms of values and working styles and personalities. Of course, this is all just a huge part of just working in film and TV. It's so collaborative, right? So you just have to make sure we just, you know, want to kind of like just, yeah, set that foundation and just kind of get to know each other. And, you know, it's like we're here to, you know, it's a long game. Like we're really hopeful of working for a long time with people, you know, and if there's one project that works out, I hope to work with you on another project and another one, right? So I think there's just that, first of all, like, please just reach out and let's just have a Zoom chat. Let's go for a coffee and let's just talk and, you know, find where we align. In terms of like the actual, like maybe like project materials, I'll say that, you know, as Priscilla was saying, it's not always easy to kind of read through tons of material. It can take it certainly takes us a bit of time to get back. But I will say that the best thing to do is send over, first of all, like connect, let's have a chat first. And then if you are interested in pitching a project, it would be great to see something that's a little further, like far along. If it's just sort of like a synopsis or an idea, you know, we like to come in maybe at a bit of a later stage. So if there's at least like a pitch deck, something like that, it's something that's a bit more like rounded out, that would be great to see. But yeah, I mean, you know, there's that. And firstly, I would say like, let's hang out. Let's just get to know each other. And let's you know, let's see that we're on the same page and we like to work in the same way and our values are aligned, and we have the same tastes. And the biggest thing is, of course, that like as producers, like what I want to do is just really empower the creator and the writer to make the absolute best project that they can, right? So it's like, first and foremost, it's like our visions aligned for the project, right? So there's all of that stuff. But yeah, please just reach out. I am always have an open door for coffees and Zoom chats. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I love that. It's like building a relationship for long term is more important because you're like working together and you want to have like a good relationship with somebody and see if your values align, as what you said. And yeah. What about Shant? If someone wants to reach out to your pictures, how can they do that?
I mean, we're definitely open. We have a submissions portal on our website, so anyone who wants to submit material can submit through it. You know, we can't guarantee we'll get back to you in a timely fashion, but it's helpful to just sort of see it. It just opens up the door for anyone to just come in and say, hey, here's who I am, here's what I'm doing. You know, because I think just thinking broadly, I would say, just with response to this question, there's two things when you're trying to build your career that I've seen have been successful. And the two things have to work in concert with each other. One is building your network and advocating for yourself. And by doing that, when you're building your network and you're advocating for yourself, you are building a network of people who will ideally advocate for you as well. And that is critical, I think, because you know, it's a real pleasure sometimes when I get an email from a colleague who says, hey, you probably don't know this person, but here's an intro to this person who you should probably get to know because they might be of interest for you to work together on. So that is critical, is even though, you know, you may not be meeting me tomorrow, you might be meeting somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows me, or whatever it is. But at the same time, we always have an open channel. People DM us on Instagram, slide into our DMs. Like, it's, you know, we're pretty open. And then the second thing I think is the work. Is you know, in addition to, it's not just it is about who you know, but and it's not just about networking, it's also about putting in the work and creating great content and creating great stories, you know, putting together a couple $100 and shooting a short film that goes on to play at festivals, profiling that advocate. So you need to have those two things work in concert, right? You make great stuff and then you advocate for that stuff, and that allows people to really advocate for you. And I think that's how you sort of rise up, or just sort of make yourself, you know, someone to pay attention to. When I was at Berlin in 2020, right before the pandemic started, I was at the Canadian Embassy party, and I met this filmmaker, Zarar Khan, who was a Pakistani filmmaker, but had Canadian citizenship. He was, you know, he was born in Pakistan, but was raised in Canada as a Canadian citizen who went to Queens, went back to Pakistan, and he made these amazing short films. He made short films that went to Locarno in competition, Clermont-Ferrand, BFI London, Palm Springs, TIFF. And this was a filmmaker that I had never, you know, I have a decent sense of the Canadian film landscape. And I was like, this guy, he's like, I've never seen like a Canadian filmmaker who's Pakistani, who's like making this amazing stuff. And I was like, you're Canadian? He's like, yeah. I was like, have you ever thought about like accessing Canadian funds? Have you ever thought about like profiling yourself in the Canadian landscape? And he, you know, was like, I'm interested, I want to get involved. And so I helped sort of like, I executive produced his film In Flames, which is now sort of just finishing up right now. And I helped him, you know, advocated for him to get into the CFC, get Talent to Watch funding, all this kind of stuff. And, you know, that was an example of where he did all the work. He did this amazing bunch of work. And then just a chance meeting at the Canadian Embassy in Berlin was like, oh my God, this guy's such a great, talented filmmaker. And no one's really heard of him. Like I emailed after the deadline had passed for Talent to Watch in 2020. And I emailed the executive and I was like, urgent, filmmaker you've never heard of, who's this amazing, very talented filmmaker, give us an extension. And they gave us a 2-week extension to submit an application, and we got funding through that. So, wow. You know, it's I mean, really putting in the work is necessary, but also building the network. Yeah.
I feel like this whole thing is like invest in yourself, invest in your talent, so then other people can see that too. I think that's the most important thing that people don't realize, is like investing in you yourself first. Rua, there's a question for you from the audience. What were the biggest lessons learned from working at Boat Rocker that you brought to your production company, Adani Pictures?
That's a good question. I mean, you know, I was fortunate to have the opportunity while I was there to work on projects with a certain scale and scope in terms of just budget and market. So it was really amazing to have that insight and to be able to kind of think big, right? Like just like thinking in terms of like what the possibilities are. So that certainly is something that I've brought to Adani Pictures in terms of just what our ambitions are and in terms of the kinds of projects that we'd like to take on. The other thing is, you know, working just in scripted TV, it is very much a writer first medium. So just, you know, just I guess the way I work is very much like writer. It's writer driven. So everything is about the writing. And there's just so much about that I learned from there, just about how to work with writers and how to kind of push a script along or like a pitch along to get to the very heart of the matter, which is what I love to see. Just kind of what is a project like at its absolute core? Like what are its themes? What are the values? What are you really trying? What is it? I always say not like what is it about, but what is it about? Like what is it really about? And just kind of to really dig in and get to that place. These are all things that I really have, you know, was really like trained in while I was at Boat Rocker, and very much what that's just the lens through which I work with at Adani as well.
I have a question from the audience again. As a producer, do you have to put up with your own capital for a movie, or do you find funding? How do you find funding? I think Priscilla, I'll start with you. I think this question is for everyone, so I'll get everyone.
Yeah, I think in Canada, especially as an emerging filmmaker, there are opportunities there used to be more opportunities to fund short films, and I had the chance to produce a Bravo Fact when that was still around, but there is still opportunity. So I think Shant mentioned the Talent to Watch Fund through Telefilm. There's several streams that can like support emerging filmmakers. Again, as Shant mentioned, like you really do have to do the work and kind of like build up a portfolio to be able to, whether it's a portfolio or that network, those packages and packaging a project for a Talent to Watch does require that kind of work and that homework, I guess, before getting to that stage of applying. And then there are also Arts Council funds available through the Canada Council of the Arts, Ontario, and whatever, like Toronto. I'm sure there are others. Like, I'm not assuming everyone's in Toronto here, so I know that there are other opportunities. Like when I lived in the Waterloo region, there's a Waterloo Arts Fund arts grant that's available. So definitely do that research as filmmakers. I think that's important homework, and I think in Canada we're in a very unique position to have these opportunities available, and there are also international funding opportunities. It's really interesting once you dive into it. You get a sense that if you are thinking about funding a short film, that could be, there might be a chance to do that too, to fund a short film. And then of course there's Telefilm and Ontario Creates, and again, like other provincial incentives to finance your films. But I think the question did also ask if you put your own capital into it.
Yeah.
I think I've definitely had to, I think more in terms of labor, as independent producers. As an independent producer, I don't make a weekly rate. So there is that like putting up capital in terms of like the energy and the labor of making something. Yeah.
What about you?
I think that was a great answer. I don't have too much more to add, except to say, right now we are actively developing a couple projects with Adani, and fortunately we haven't had to put our own capital until we were able to raise, the full budget for development through different funds, including, I guess, the CMF and the Bell Fund and Ontario Creates. So we haven't been in a position yet to have to put in our own capital. That may very well be the case in the future. But as of now, I think we are lucky, as Priscilla was saying, that there are a lot of funding opportunities in Canada. Of course it's competitive and you have to dig and there's a lot of research involved and you have to do the work, as Shant was saying. But there are a lot of possibilities, and we've just kind of been trying to take advantage of all of them. And so far we've been lucky, but yeah, that may change in the future.
And what about you, Shant? Since you also you're working in Los Angeles and in Canada, so has that affected or impacted your funding?
I mean, it increases my expenses a bit because I'm working out of two countries, and I do a lot of traveling. So there is definitely, whether you're accessing funding from CMF or Ontario Creates or Telefilm, I see that as it's funding for sure, but the how you decide where you're allocating that money, where that's going. The idea is that that is an investment, right? So if you get $1 from the Canada Media Fund, my goal is to make that $1 into $3. And what does that mean? How do I yield that, basically? So that's how I'm looking at every drop of money, whether it's mine own or someone else who's funded something. So I do, like Priscilla said, we work long hours, I don't clock in, clock out. I try and keep a balance. I try and stop work around 5, but sometimes that ends up being 7. Sometimes that ends up being 9, sometimes midnight, sometimes you're just doing an all-nighter, trying to get an application in. It happens. No one's counting the hours. I'm not clocking in overtime, so that is an investment, that is an investment of my own time, of my own energies. And that is human capital. But yeah, I mean, we're hoping that the revenues that we yield then go back and invest into our next projects so that we continue to grow as a company. And then in terms of like, how do you find funding? I mean, there's two of the biggest resources I used have been reading credits on movies and TV shows and just like seeing like, oh, Shaw Rocket Fund funded this and they didn't fund this, or IPF funded this and they didn't fund this. It's like getting a sense of like appetites for funders based on the stories that they're funding, and IMDb. So just, looking for projects that you think you fit in that space. Or if you maybe don't fit in that space, you're trying to break that space. Sometimes we do that too. We go to Telefilm and say, no, actually, you should be funding projects that are outside of English and French, and anyways. But yeah, it's just a lot of research, conversations, and reading a lot of credits.
That's a really good tip. Our next question is, what are the funding streams you tend to rely on in Canada? I think a lot of people did mention like CMF and all of those things. Is it mainly government grants? And if so, can you give advice to new filmmakers about grant writing, etc.? Priscilla.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on most of them already, like Telefilm, Ontario Create, CMF, Bell Funds. And that's such a great piece of advice, Shant. Like I do it too. The credits are amazing, and even just like collaborators, and like if someone you like, yeah, I've like, oh, like this is a stunt coordinator, like, like it's just so useful, and like stay for the credits. Like so many people worked on these things, like these films and TV series, and like just but yeah, I mean that's such a great resource. And in terms of grant writing, there are actually a lot of like lift workshops. There's like a lift workshop for grant writing. It's really, it's really affordable. I think like everyone should check out Lyft. I'm actually doing like a production management course with them, and I used to take Lyft workshops when I was like even before university, and so I just love the idea that it exists. And then I think even like the Toronto Public Library, they offer like a grant writing course, which I think is really interesting. But there's resources out there to kind of help filmmakers and artists to like get that practice and get some advice on grant writing.
Yeah, I also know that if you're a first-time filmmaker, like the art councils actually will help you with your application. That doesn't mean that you will get the application like succeed, but they will definitely like look at your application and tell you if there's any missing gaps before you apply. I think that mostly everybody touched upon the funding streams in Canada, but if Rua or Shant has anything to add, go ahead.
I'll just add to that. Yes, we talked, I think, about most of the funds. In terms of writing out the applications, one thing I'll add is it would do you well to speak with somebody who has had a successful application before, right? Just get that advice and like mentorship on what exactly they're looking for and how to write a successful application. Some of the funds ask for things that can be a little extensive, like an audience development plan or a marketing plan or strategy. Those are things that maybe, some people are not super well versed in. So it would be good to just speak to someone who's done that before. The other thing I'll say is that even the analysts at the funds themselves are usually very helpful. Call them up, email them, and ask for a one-on-one meeting or a chat with them and talk through your project and what you're thinking in terms of your application. And they'll usually be really great about giving you some tips and pointers. And it's also just a great way to like build that relationship with the financiers, right? And I find that, most of them they want you to succeed. They want you to do well. So take that initiative and call them up and just have a chat with them even pre putting in your application.
That's a really, really great tip, actually.
For me, in addition to everything that Priscilla and Rua said, I like to read the guidelines. Like I print them out whenever I have a new application I have to do. I print them out and I read them like I'm reading a book. Like I read top to bottom, the fine print. I mean, it's there because sometimes you may miss something, or you think you have all the pieces of the puzzle, and you're just like, sometimes you're rushing through it because maybe you're like, you only realize that the application's due like next week or something. But I think I'm a big guidelines nerd, so I just like read through the guidelines. It's a cheat sheet for how to be successful in your application. And then similarly, yeah, I talk to the people who have been successful. And you know, also you're gauging and you're judging yourself, and you're looking at the competition, and you're saying, where do I fit in this? You know, because obviously, like, I mean, at this point for our company, like, there has to be a certain level of prediction in terms of like, are we going to get access to this funding? Are we going to get access to this funding? Otherwise, like, we can't run a company. Like, we need to be able to like know where our revenue sources are coming from. So, you know, we do try and be very critical of ourselves, very realistic about our chances of accessing funding, backup plans for if I don't get this funding, what's my backup for this if I need it to close my gap or whatever. So, we're constantly, yeah. But I think, you know, it's also the quality of the application. So making sure it's nice and clean and understandable and concise, and you know, is answering their questions, right? Read the guidelines. Like there will be lines in there that'll be like, make sure you talk about this. And if you don't talk about it, then, you know, suddenly you lose 2 points, and then maybe your application was really high up. Maybe you got 80 points out of 100, and then you lost those 2 points because you didn't mention one thing, because you didn't fully read the guidelines. And then you're 78, and then everyone else who was 80 plus got the thing, and then everyone, you know, whatever. Like, it's like, try not to make sometimes those small things end up being the difference between getting the funding and not getting the funding.
Actually, Shant, I had a question for you about, you know, like, you sit on many boards. And why is that important for you to be in those positions to make those decisions? Because like only in the last few years have we seen like BIPOC male and females being in those executive positions, and it's still like changing slowly. But what has your experience been being in those boards, and why did you think that it was important for you to be in those positions?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually spurred by sometimes, I don't know necessarily if it's rejection per se, but I think we have seen existing barriers to access to funding for specifically racialized and you know, marginalized filmmakers. Barriers like I mentioned, language, like Telefilm not allowing a project that is more than 50% non-English or French or indigenous language to be able to even apply. Those are existing barriers that exist, or that are present. And so I became an advocate. I became in my own activistic way, fought for, you know, change. And so then, you know, all on my own, like all just as president of A Pictures, I was like, I want to say this, I'm going to write this letter, I'm going to do this. And slowly and surely, people saw the work that I was doing and said, hey, do you want to do that work within the structure of BIPOC TV and film, or within the structure of the Canadian Media Producers Association? And so those were great opportunities, because then I was able to do my advocacy work with the foundation of, you know, these amazing organizations, but also at the same time learn from my colleagues in the space in terms of what barriers they're hitting, because I'm not in every space, you know, I'm not doing everything. So it's good to sort of get that full-bodied perspective on what's going on in this industry, because then it helps you, you know, more effectively pave a path forward for your own career and for your company.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to like stick up for what you believe in and really like take it forward, and not just like a lot of people complain, but you actually like went out there and like spoke up for, like became an advocate, which is so important. And I think that's great. Priscilla, when you first made your film, obviously it probably took like a lot of passion and grit, right? And sometimes what happens with like first time filmmakers and producers is like they'll make first one and they'll get like, it's not always the best work sometimes because you're trying things out for the first time and it might not work out. But then how do you find like grit to do the second and third and continue on from that?
Oh my God. That's such a hard question. How do you find the grit? Oh God. I really just, I've thought a lot about this in the last few years, and I think like really ultimately, like with my company and my goal as a producer, like I would love to just create a career, like build a career that's sustainable in like making movies and film and TV and just like having that the ability to create, I think is the thing that's propelling me forward. I think that's where the grit is coming from, because I think, again, like kind of rewinding back to the first question, I knew this was going to be a risky career, to a risky and competitive career. Like it isn't a stable career. And so I think like every project that I work on, I find that, almost every project has its challenges, but I think I've just been really fortunate to be like collaborating with like really amazing people and really talented people. And I think I've formed friendships and connections that are really valuable to me. And I think as I continue like from project to project and moving forward in my career, I am always reminded and constantly reminded of the human aspects of what we do. And it is about these relationships ultimately. And I think as a producer, it's about being responsible, like kind of recognizing the responsibility of taking care of people. That it isn't like filmmaking is really a collaborative art form, that you just like can't escape the like, it is just like a lot of hard work. They're like 16-hour days for a lot of folks, and it's like it's just being a producer and kind of like being at the helm of like creating this thing with your director and like all of your key creatives. Like I think it's just important to remember the human aspect of it. And I think, yeah, again, I think it's just like forming these relationships, recognizing your responsibility as a producer, and knowing that you can sort of like pave a way to like continue to make things more sustainable for other people too, and other creatives. So yeah, I think that's where the grit comes from. It's just like all of those things. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, totally. I think that forming those kind of relationships, sometimes if you're down, they help you up, and they're down, they help like them up. And it's just like a team and collaborative effort to like take whatever you believe in forward. So that was a great answer. Rua, when you started off, how did you first form like your relationship with like broadcasters and streamers and filmmakers or writers?
When I started Adani?
Yeah.
Well, in terms of working or finding and meeting new writers and stuff, one thing I do is I keep an eye on, there are such great programs and writers labs and things out there, right? Like there's the CFC, there's also the Real World like E20 program, there's the Netflix Banff Diversity of Voices, there's what else is there? There's a Warner Media Access program. So I love meeting people from those programs. It's exciting to kind of chat with them and see what new things they're working on. So that's always something. But also, just in general, like I said, like I'm very open to kind of meeting people all the time. Like, just if you just send me an email, I'm happy to have a chat. So that's important. In terms of meeting with the broadcasters and the streamers, that's an important, those are just important relationships to keep up. So as I said, actually, even just through the labs I've been doing this year, that's been a great access point, just to kind of continue talking with them. But also just besides our one-on-one like relationships, it's just really important for us is that we just keep up with what they're greenlighting and what they're not, keeping up with what they're putting into development, and then what doesn't pass from that stage, and thinking about why that is. And just, you know, also keeping abreast of like when you're doing that, when you're looking at what projects they're putting into development and then what they're greenlighting, also getting a sense of the writers that they like, the directors that they like, and then thereby kind of developing your own strategy for what, you know, for what to take on and what to pitch to which broadcaster. So that's kind of how we've been navigating it.
It's like building those relationships is always a constant thing that we're hearing from everybody.
Always.
There's a question from the audience. I'm going to read it out. Are there writers, filmmakers that are on your radar that we should be on ours? I think there's a mistake there, but let me read the rest of the question. I loved how Shant mentioned a Pakistani filmmaker that he didn't know of, but connected with. How are you finding great writers and voices that are a little less known or newer in the industry? Do you help them develop their craft further, or look for writers, filmmakers that are already proficient? That's for Shant.
Sure, yeah. It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of all of it. One of the things that I really like to do is watch short film programs at film festivals. Those are great sort of, you know, proof of concepts of, you know, execution. You know, because film is a lot more of a execution heavy developmental process than say TV, which is very much like, you know, TV is the collaboration between the broadcaster, the producer, the writer, the director. It's like it's a full sort of lineup of collaboration between between all of them, whereas film is a lot more director centric. And so when we're looking at film, when we're looking to do films, like, you know, watching shorts, seeing that execution from the written page through to on the screen is super important. It's how most of the projects that we end up getting involved with happen, just by virtue. I mean, we do through multiple different channels, but, you know, ultimately, like, I watched Defund at the 2021 TIFF Shortcuts, Khadija Roberts Abdullah's project, and I just like loved her voice. Like, I could not get enough of it. And so we're doing a TV show with her, and you know, I think and you know, at the same time, like, you know, Khadijah's still emerging as a creator, so we're spending time you know, incubating her and her co-creators on building out the project, because we believe in the project. You know, I think ultimately, if you're passionate enough about the creator and you're passionate enough about the content, then you'll go through many strides to make it happen, and that can include incubation. But it also is very refreshing to work with very experienced filmmakers who you know, no offense to emerging filmmakers, know what they're doing, in the sense of like you, as soon as you're like, okay, great, we're going to do this, they know exactly what they need to do. They don't need their hand held in terms of doing it. They're, you know, we're casting this movie right now in South Africa, and we're working with this filmmaker who's done like a dozen features and lots of commercials and all this kind of stuff, and it's just like smooth as butter because he knows what he's doing. He knows how to make it work. And at the same time, we're also at the same time incubating his son, who's a transmasculine emerging filmmaker. And so it's a father-son directing team that we're working with. The father, very experienced, the son, somewhat experienced, but still needs a little bit more. But them working together is a fantastic collaboration that we're doing right now.
That sounds pretty cool. Priscilla, question for you. As a first-time producer or director, how do you convince the funders that you can get the job done?
Yeah, I mean, I think I brought it up before in terms of the package, but I guess the question would be, can you get the job done? What experience do you have in getting the job done? And if like after answering that question, like kind of asking yourself that question and answering it, like who on your team do you need to add? Who do you need to add on your team to get the job done? So I think it's important to be honest with like your place in your career. And when I was starting out as a producer, there's the grit and the will to do it, but then there is the actual like practical reality of doing it. And I think it is important to like just go out there and make something. If you like, expose like network, but also go on set and see how things are made. Like, especially as a director and a producer, if you have no idea what happens on set, like, how can you really say that you're going to put this thing forward and get people to make the thing without really knowing how it can be made? And I think, like, I come from like a more production background. Like, my strength is in production, and so I am often on the ground, and like I really, it's really important, I think, for um, emerging first time filmmakers to like really know what happens on the ground to like make, to produce a script and produce a concept. And so, yeah, and I think sorry, I'm really bad at answering these questions tonight for
You're
some
doing
reason.
great.
I
It's
like
very
forget what the
valuable.
question is. No,
No,
but
you do.
ultimately, yeah, I think it is just like it's a question of packaging a project to convince the funders if you can actually make it. Whether or not the package is like, I've produced 4 short films already that have like gone to market and have done really well at film festivals, that should be proof enough for you to fund my feature. Or is it like, I've attached this really great executive producer who has like a ton of experience in production, who's really going to guide me to get to a place where we can make this thing a reality. And yeah, I think it's just important to know how to build a team, and to like, really be practical about it, and not, don't fall into the assumption that you can make it until you've really asked yourself if you really can, and who do you need to help you get to that place where you can make a thing.
That's actually a really great advice, because sometimes we don't realize how hard it could be to make that film until we actually like go out there and make it. And so investing in yourself definitely is a way to do it. Like, make that first film by yourself, see what it takes, and then add people onto your team and build it. Rua, your last question before we end this, but do you ever take on projects that are already in post-production?
We have not taken on projects that are already in post-production. We, have been developing original scripted series. And on the feature side, we are looking at service productions and at international co-productions, and coming on as perhaps a minority partner. But it is, we're not really looking right now at coming into projects that are already in post-production necessarily.
Okay. Okay, this question is for all of you guys. So where do you see the future of Canadian film, TV, and digital production in the next 5 to 10 years? And one advice that you wish you could tell your younger producer self when you first started? And we'll go from Priscilla, Rua, and Shant.
That's a big question. Yeah, I mean, I am just super excited and hopeful for the media landscape in Canada. I think, seeing the latest Talent to Watch cohort, of which I'm very excited to be one of the producers to be supporting. And I think, as Shant mentioned, there are a lot of changes right now with breaking down the language barriers, and I think there's some like really exciting opportunities down the road. And I think it's I'm very hopeful, and I think opening up those opportunities, breaking the language barriers, and more advocacy and work in making sets inclusive and diverse, I think there is just like a ton of potential. And in terms of advice, oh my gosh, what was the advice? What was
The
the question
advice
about
for your
advice?
younger self when you first started producing.
Okay. Oh, I think like really just I I would tell myself to trust your gut and know when to walk away. I think as young and I think as young producers, emerging producers, you tend to just like you want to take everything on, you want to say yes to everything. And I think what I've learned in the last few years is like as individuals, our energy is finite, and I think it's just really important to focus on like the good energy, focus on the good relationships, and be fine with saying no to the others that don't fit that category.
I love that. Rua?
In terms of where I see things in the next 5 or 10 years, I would say that I echo that I'm very, very hopeful and very excited because I've seen it like with my own eyes, just kind of over the last few years, just the sea change in the kinds of talents that are coming out, the kinds of stories that are being written, the kind of scripts that are being written, the stories that are being told. When I first started out, there were BIPOC people in the industry, and there are a lot of BIPOC writers and directors and all of that. But there's just an attitude change that I've seen in the last 2-3 years. I think since George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and I really want to say that it doesn't feel like a superficial sort of flash in the pan sort of thing. I just see a sea change in just like attitudes and like just the writers I meet, just how bold and unapologetic they are. Just how they're writing things that are not meant to be necessarily palatable to a quote unquote mainstream audience, whatever that means. And I just love it. I love it so much. And it's just what I've been waiting for. And, I remember a few years ago coming across one project like that, in a sea of submissions and things that I was reading. And it was so exciting to me. And it just really truly like reminded me like, oh, this is why I wanted to be in this industry. Like, this is why I wanted to be a producer. And it's just so insane now to be seeing multiple projects like that. Like there's so many, just these bold, authentic, unapologetic voices. And so, yeah, I'm just really hopeful and excited to see that continue and continue to build. Where was I? Sorry, that's where I see the next 5-10 years. In terms of advice to my younger self, I would say, I would echo that as well. Just focus on the good, focus on what you want out of your career, focus on the kind of life that you want to have, both like work-life balance, like focus on that. That's important. I think just be really like, there's so many distractions out there. There's so many like people who are telling you different things, and there's so many who are doing different whatever. I think it's just really important to have a real like self-awareness, like know who you are, know what you want out of your career. No, it's not going to be the same. I don't think there's one definition of success, right? There's no one way of doing things. So if you are, setting out to be an independent producer, think about the kind of company that you want. Think about the kinds of projects that you want to work on. And just focus on that. Especially I think, with social media and with all of that, there's a lot of noise, right? Like it's very easy to kind of lose focus. So I would tell myself that.
Great, thank you. And Shant? Oh, you're mute.
Sorry, there was the advice question, and then there was another question that was before that.
Where do you see the film industry going in the next 5 years?
Well, I mean, I think Priscilla and Rua covered it pretty well, but I would say the one thing I would add is the introduction of ideally Bill C-11 into the landscape. It's ideally going to make our film and TV landscape look a lot more global, which is really exciting. And that can mean, you know, hyper local stories. It can mean, you know, like just like a story set in the middle of Nunavut, or, you know, in Alberta or wherever, but stories that appeal to a global audience. And I use the word global, even though I know one of our broadcasters, their name is Global, but our broadcasters in Canada service a Canadian audience, a specific Canadian audience that are cable plugging, you know, they plug into cable and watch their TV that way. And then there are, you know, cable cutters, but it's less of a market. You have Gem and Crave, but they don't have as much money that they're able to spend towards those audiences. And here you have giants like Netflix and Amazon and Disney coming into Canada already, spending a whole ton of money doing their productions and benefiting from, you know, our viewers, our consumers, as well as our workforce, without paying into the system. And so this new bill ideally will have them pay into the system and contribute to the system and be able to support Canadian filmmakers in telling stories that can hit a global audience. I think that's just the most exciting thing that I'm seeing right now. And a piece of advice that I would give to myself when I was younger, I would say something that Priscilla said really resonated with me. It's just like, sometimes it's just the truth that you're not ready. Sometimes you think you can do it, but then, like, honestly, like sometimes there have been situations where like we've received funding or we've landed a project and we're like, oh my God, this is great. We have what we wanted. And then we start and we're like, wait a second, like, how do we close a bank loan? How do we do this? How do, like, you know, like all those kind of extra things. And luckily, you know, we work with fantastic executive producers who teach us sometimes how to put things together or facilitate this or facilitate that. And, you know, I'm a pretty quick learner, but there have been times where I've just been like, no, I can do it. I just give me the money and I'll do it. You know, and then it's, you know, it's not gonna work out. So sometimes it's just like you're not ready, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be working. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be working on it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be improving your craft and working on what you're doing. So I think that's my biggest piece of advice to myself when I was younger.
These are all great pieces of advice, and I hope that everyone gained some knowledge out of this panel today. We're going to wrap up now. Thank you so much, Priscilla, Rua, and Shant. You guys were amazing. I myself have learned so much from you guys. And I'm just going to get Samir to come back and do the closing remarks.
Thank you, Shreya.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shreya, for directing this amazing conversation. I'm really happy that you all talk. I really think the kind of future of Canadian television and Canadian cinema is in good hands with you three and everyone else, like producers like yourselves. I just hope that, you know, you're all getting the right amount of sleep you deserve. It sounds like you're all working incredibly hard. We'd love to continue this discussion on our Discord. If you aren't on our Discord yet, we would love for you to join. We'll drop a link in the chat. We'll also drop a link to our QR code. Please let us know how you like this conversation and what we can do to improve. Thank you so much to Denise, our amazing live captioner. Thank you so much to our backhand support Vidya, Mimi, and Joe. Just a reminder that Real Asian is going on until November 20th. You can learn more about the festival at realasian.com/festival and to check out any tickets. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow at the exact same time on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Samir.
Perfect. Mimi, we're good to go?